we've had no voice at all. We've really been totally underground. So I feel like we're starting to come up, we're still kind of in the mud, but we're coming up. Our voices are going to be heard, and I think people are going to empathize with us. We're not transphobes. We're not terrible people that are trying to hurt kids. We're trying to help kids.
Hi, Artie Morty here. I'm here with a woman named Eleanor who's going to tell us her story about her child who has been roped into this gender mess. Is that right?
That is correct. We're well
Yeah.
roped in.
Eleanor, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. First of all, it's really nice to meet you. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi, how are you, Artie?
I'm very good. Yeah, let's stick with Artie. I know
You're
you know my
already
real name.
famous to me because I heard you way back early in my journey. I think you were on the Sasha and
Oh,
Stella
gender awareness.
show. Yeah,
Yeah,
one of the early ones.
that's right.
I
Yeah.
think I was still a little drinking the Kool-Aid then, so you were part of
Mm.
my turning.
Oh, that's very moving. I'm probably gonna get
I
upset
mean,
or crying at some point as we're
I
talking.
might too.
I get very sensitive around this stuff. It's hard not to,
Yeah, I'm either like cracking up and trying to like I can't believe this is my life, or else I'm in a puddle. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm the same. Eleanor, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're in Pennsylvania, is that right?
I'm in Pennsylvania. I have 2 teenage kids. I've been a stay-at-home mom. I have a chronic illness, so that probably weighs on into some of this story. But my son is 17 now, and this all started when he was just about 15. And I think my story is a little bit different, but yet a little bit just like all the other moms of boys stories that we've heard. My son has Asperger's, was
Hmm.
diagnosed at age 5, super smart, highly gifted, so sort of an outlier socially his whole life. In elementary school, he had a one-on-one aide who would kind of help keep him on track and also give him sort of extra work to keep him busy.
Yeah,
So that was a social ostracizer, though, that he was the
yeah.
kid with the adult lady all the time.
Yeah. So let me just stop
Hmm.
back up there for a minute. So you are in a group with other parents who have kids who have been roped into the gender mess. Is that right?
Yes, and specifically boys.
Specifically boys. That's
It
right.
took me a
So
while, but I found my way into this group, and that's where Angus found us.
yeah, Angus Fox. That's right. So
Yes,
you know a lot. It's really interesting. Before we get into your story on your child, you can probably already tell some of the patterns of the kinds of boys that are getting roped into this, can't you?
very much so. And my son, starting in 6th grade, which seemed like an awesome move, started going to a charter school, small school for gifted kids. They're all kind of quirky. He made friends. It seemed like a great move. They're very, very kind there, which sounded like a really great thing at the beginning. And my husband, who's also quirky, but he was always saying things like, well, my son hums a lot, which is sort of adorable, but yet the older you get, it's an ostracizing thing for other kids. But at this school, everybody loves that he hums. Yay, humming. Like
Mm,
everybody's so accepting of everything that you're not sort of getting that peer pressure that I don't mean bullying, but just that
mhm.
little bit of like, hey, I'm trying to hear something. Can you stop? It's
Yeah,
almost like, let's all stop and listen to this kid hum for a while and then we'll move on. Um,
yeah. It's like affirmation to use
it's
a word
very
that is very
much like
loaded.
that. And at the time, it seemed great, all this
Mhm.
acceptance, because he hadn't gotten that when he was younger. But yeah, looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe if he had gone to regular public school, there would have been a little more. I don't know. It's happening everywhere, though. I have
Yeah,
kids that
maybe a
I
little
know
bit
in
more
public
push
school.
to like if you're way outside of some sort of norms of behavior, there's going to be some pushback to try to get in line with some of the norms.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's
and
the
that's not such a
opposite
bad
of.
thing. Yeah,
No, not in a gentle way.
yeah,
So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. So, at this school, he made friends. He seemed to be doing well. And then puberty hit at about 14. And I know this more now that kids on the autism spectrum have a really hard time with puberty. In all of the autism seminars, every parenting thing I've gone to, this was never brought up. So I think
really.
this is something that needs to be focused upon. And we've worked on this a little bit. Some in my group have talked to some gifted groups and groups that help people with autism, saying you really need to prepare these kids more than your average kid for these big bodily and mental changes that they're going to
Yeah.
experience, that they can kind of prepare for it. Because, like, just the
Mhm.
regular basic sex ed at school is not much.
Right. So
Um,
in puberty, you're developing sexual feelings. You're also developing secondary sex characteristics.
yes,
You've got hormones changing your behavior. And of course, you're also in peer groups where peers are starting to behave very differently. And all of this stuff must be very hard if you have autism. I can
it's a
imagine.
lot. Yeah, it's a lot of input. And then this, I think when you're autistic, at least for my kid, I feel there's always been a little bit of dissociation from his physical body. So
Mhm.
this just made that worse.
Was it the body changes specifically, or was it more the sexual awakening, or was it the peers behaving differently, or all of the above?
All of the above. I think less so the peers, but more the body changes and the hormones and the sexuality that he didn't quite know how to deal with. He was always such a happy kid, but he was became more sullen. All the things that are quote normal for a teenager going into puberty. More time in his room, a little snarkier, not talking as much to me. And this was 2019 for Thanksgiving. We went to my husband's family in upstate New York with the kids, and the kids were just freaking miserable. They were so grumpy and asocial and not friendly to the family. And usually they would enjoy being around their cousins. It was just extreme. My husband almost said, "Why don't we just leave early? Like, they're not having a good time and it's making us not have a good time." But we muddled through. And when we got home and they went back to school, I tore his room apart because I'm like, something's going on.
Mhm.
Um, and I should have been much more on top of the technology if I had it to do all over again. I found on his iPad the splash screen of it was what I found out to be the trans flag. I didn't know what flag it
Mm.
was at the
Mhm.
time, and a anime girl who had like his hair color and eyes, and trans TRANZ and proud, so
Mm.
edgy. So um,
Wow.
and then I searched further. There were a lot of pictures of what I would call anime porn, like
Wow.
pictures of anime girls.
Yeah.
Um,
Illustrated, obviously, drawings
Yeah,
of yeah.
illustrated, nothing real, no actual photographs. And then on Discord conversations with friends, he was saying it was so miserable to be on this vacation and everybody was misgendering me. First time I heard that term. And
Wow. Oh my
how
gosh, you
would,
were thrown right into it. This
oh
must have
my
been
gosh.
like, wow.
Yeah, I remember sitting there on his bed, like looking at his stuff, going like, what is this? But I've been historically super liberal. All I really knew about trans was like a little vague thing about Jazz Jennings, who was this, brave and amazing kid from what I had heard. And it didn't really know anything else, but figured he must be one of these one in a gazillion people who really was born in the wrong body. Like, I really felt empathy for him. Yeah, exactly. And also with the autism, I'm thinking, like, how does he think we know this? He doesn't have that ability to put himself really well into someone else's thought process.
Mhm.
So if he in his mind thinks I should be called by a girl's
Mhm.
name, then he
Yeah.
assumes we should know. So I confronted him with it. I wasn't angry or anything. I was just like confused. And I said, "Oh, I found this." He's like, "Oh, you found that?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you think you're a transgender woman?" He said, "Yeah, I think so." Very matter of fact. And we went through like, well, how do you think we'd be misgendering you if we have no idea that any of this was happening? He was like, oh yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that. Very
Hmm.
childlike about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Where did you come up with this idea, or where did you learn about this? Well, a composer of video game music, who's kind of, I guess, like an influencer online. I think I wrote the name down because I think this is who it is. Lena Raine, Raine. Like, if you Google video game music composers transgender, a few come up. But that one had something to do with like Minecraft music and
Mm,
stuff that all
mhm.
these kids are into.
Yeah,
Um,
this sort of nerd culture that's really
yes. And I was feeling kind of weird, and that seems to make sense of it. And I was sort of drinking the Kool-Aid. So I'm like, well, do you want to go shopping? Do you want new clothes? Do you want nail polish?
wow.
No, fine in my sweats and my comfy Star Wars shirts and really didn't want to change anything other
Hmm.
than wanted to be called by this name Aya, which is like a video game name,
Hmm.
and she, her pronouns. So I kind of went along with it. In my mind, I'm preparing for how am I going to tell my husband this? It's happening.
Yeah.
Um, and went along for a while. I kind of told my husband, I think, he's having some confusion with his gender, might be real. I don't know. My husband's pretty liberal too. And we saw that Dwayne Wade, the basketball player, had a kid who was a
Okay.
boy and then was transgender. So my husband brought that among, yeah, it
Hmm.
seems to be kind of becoming popular, which is weird.
Yeah, it's
And
catching
my,
on.
um, and my son said, because at the time I wasn't thinking either. I said, "Do you want to have surgery? What do you think?" He said, "Maybe someday, but I think I would like to start hormones sometime." I was like, "All right, we'll have to learn about that." Um, so I just kind of let it fly under the radar for a while. But then he came to me and said he has a new name and wants to be called Chloe because a bot online called him Chloe, as opposed to the name he was given that was, a family name that
Wow.
we put a lot of thought into. An online bot said, "Hi, Chloe," and that was it.
Chloe is a probably the most common trans woman name
It
too. It's
is.
like
What's up with that?
because
I
it's such
want
a
to
like
research that.
it's like such a cartoonishly feminine kind of name,
I guess
Chloe.
so.
Yeah.
Chloe. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
kind of old fashioned. I don't know. I feel sorry for
Yeah.
the girls named Chloe, but um
It's true.
so I was kind of going along with it until that happened and he really kind of came to me and said, "Chloe, and I'd like to be female pronouns." And I'd mentioned that to my husband, and my husband was kind of like, "No, I'm not doing that."
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of got upset. I was like, "Well, like, we have to support him. This is like a crazy thing and it's very rare and we need to be supportive. It can do a lot of damage if we're not." My husband said, "You know what? I think he'll figure it out. He wants to do that when he's an adult, but I just don't think that that's healthy." Now I've come around to being so glad that my husband said that and kind of stopped me in my tracks and got me looking and researching online for later onset transgender feelings, because I did say to my son, I mostly hear about this happening when kids are like 2 and 3, which
Mm-hmm.
I think that's not really a reality anymore the more I've learned, but that it's early on and they've kind of spent their whole lives being gender confused. You were the John Deere tractor, knew every model, stereotypical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, like I didn't see anything. And he said, "Yeah, it probably started around puberty." And then the next day he came to me and said, "You know what? I think I have always felt this way. I never said anything," which is
Mm.
something that they tell the kids to tell their parents, that they've
Yeah.
always felt this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even really say anything to my son. I just stopped calling him Chloe and stopped
Mm.
using the female pronouns. And that's kind of where we've been. It's this big elephant in the room.
Right.
My daughter, who's 2 years younger, they're super close. She's super supportive of him. They have some of the same friend group. So she will say Chloe and she and her. And for the most part, I just let it slide. She won't say it in front of my husband, but she'll say it in front of me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but one day, I forget what we were doing, but she said it, and I had done a million things and was stressed out. And I just said, "I don't do Chloe." Like she was correcting me when I said his real name. She said, "You mean Chloe?" I said, "I don't do Chloe." She was like, "What? What are you talking about?" Very upset with me for a few days. And then everything's kind of gone back to normal. Like
Mm.
she says it a little bit less. But I
Mm.
basically told her I don't believe in the truth of this. I think it's sort of a scandalous thing that's happening to all of these kids. And meanwhile, as I'm kind of coming out of my Kool-Aid phase, I find out from my next door neighbor. She said, "Oh, a couple of friends from school, one of her kids goes to our kids' school, are coming over to swim. Two of them, giving me boy names, are now called two girl names. So two kids we knew as boys are now Maya and Katie." And I was like,
Mm.
"What the hell? At
Yeah.
this same small school?" So then I proceeded to tell my neighbor what was happening at my house, and she was like, "Oh, that's really weird." Two
Oh.
moms who I knew vaguely from school, and they're really all in. Both of their kids are now on puberty blockers and hormones. They go to CHOP,
Oh
Children's Hospital of
no.
Philadelphia, and it's just crazy to me. And
Yeah, I mean, so how old are the other two? These other two?
they're my daughter's grade. One's my son's grade, one's my daughter. So I would say like 15, 16.
Okay, and they're already on puberty blockers and perhaps maybe even starting on cross-sex hormones. Is
Oh,
that
for
right?
sure, the one, Katie, is on cross-sex hormones because the breasts are forming.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
the one, Maya, has gone to, I forget what you call it, like give a sperm donation because
Oh yeah, so
to
that they can
store
preserve it.
sperm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at 15.
Isn't that so strange? Isn't anybody stopping and going, obviously, this is a social contagion? If there's even a chance that it's a social contagion, you don't rush your child to permanent medical sterilization. And when you know it's going to be sterilization to the point that you're planning already
At
around it
15.
at 15. Yeah,
I,
that's astonishing.
it really all kind of made me step back and look at everything through a new lens.
Yeah, that must have been a difficult journey for you because you were like most people, you think, okay, I'm a positive, accepting person. I know that there have been transgender people in the media, and this is a rare thing, but I have to be as accepting as possible. I'm a loving mother, and this is my child, and I'm a progressive mother, and I don't want to be like those homophobes. That must have come up in your mind at some point, right?
Oh,
That this was
very
a
much
parallel.
so. Very much so. And we have gay friends, and one of our friends was visiting from South Florida, and I was telling him about what was happening with my
Mm-hmm.
son. And he's, because he knows my son a little bit, he's like, maybe I think he's just gay. Which
Do you think he is gay?
I
It sounds to me
do.
like, oh, you do think he's gay? Okay.
I didn't at first, but I don't know. Is it this new gay which is not really gay? Where so he has a friend at his school who also is kind of going down the same path, but his parents are pretty much homophobic. So it's very under the radar for the parents in a way. Although the mom has said, yeah, he's told me like he has these silky pajamas he likes to wear, but I've told him that's not a lifestyle that's easy and we don't condone it and that kind of stuff. So this is pretty much my kid's best friend. I have seen texts between them, nothing really untoward, I guess, but in the evening they'll say goodnight to each other by saying snuggles, love
Mm-hmm.
you, that kind of stuff. So very, they're both very awkward,
Mm-hmm.
spectrumy kids,
Yeah.
but it's a
Yeah.
very loving and sweet closeness that I'm seeing in those.
Mm-hmm.
But yet this boy also has a little bit of thinking he wants to be a girl. So I think he thinks he's a lesbian, which is
The other
insane.
boy thinks he's a
They both
lesbian.
do. They both do.
Oh,
They both do.
wow.
Because they both think they're girls
Mm-hmm. But
and
does
that
that
they
mean
like
that
each other.
they like each other? I see. Okay. But you don't think he's attracted to girls? You don't think he's straight?
I'm honestly not 100% sure. And early on in this, when I was asking, do you want clothes, nail polish, any of that? He said, no. I
Mm-hmm.
asked, are you attracted to boys or girls or, nobody? He said,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know yet,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
I think he does probably know. How can you not know?
At what age is this, sir? Yeah, like
15.
15 is the eye of the storm,
Okay. Yeah.
as I remember it.
So it could be somewhat, I don't know why kids would be, if embarrassed is the right word, about coming out as gay, as opposed to they're not embarrassed at all to come out as transgender.
Well, transgender isn't necessarily about the act of having sex, right? It's about having an identity and a personality. It's about
That's
yourself
true.
and your presentation. There does seem to be a lot of fear of sex in young people these days. That seems to be going on. I wouldn't be surprised. You may know more than me because you are in this peer group. Do you see a lot of that with the other parents too, saying that their kids are afraid to talk about sex, afraid to think about sex, kind of afraid of sex?
I really should bring that up. I don't know. For these other two kids who are on the hormones, the one, Katie, is really apparently wants to get on the other side of this, is very much like when I'm fully a woman and I've had all the surgeries and everything, then I will come out and then I'll figure out what I want. So the whole obsession, his whole life is about becoming this person that he thinks he wants to be. And I'm like, ooh, are you setting yourself up for this big disappointment that
What did they think
you're
they're good?
still
Like,
you?
you're still you. What does it even mean to be a woman when you're just, applying the superficial, you know, um, like it's very, very strange. Now I can understand, of course, we're both familiar with the term autogynephilia. I can
Mhm.
understand that some of these boys think they're girls because they're sexually attracted to female bodies and they have this inward sexual attraction. So when they say they want to be girls, they mean they want to have the aspects of female sexuality that turn them on. They want to
Yes,
have those sex
and that could
characteristics.
be my kid. I really
Yeah.
don't know. Of course, I can't
Hmm.
take him to a doctor to help me figure it out because they'll just
No.
say, "Here are the hormones, and you're a terrible mother."
Mhm. But then on the other hand, these gay boys who may have some feminine aspects will want to identify as women because that helps them understand and explain why they may be a little bit gender nonconforming and why their sexual orientation is different than the other boys. So it's hard to tell, isn't it?
It's really hard to tell. And my kid being autistic is not great at understanding himself
Hmm.
and at communicating his feelings. So it's really hard to know what's going on in there.
So how do you think this started with him? Remind me again how old he was, do you think, when he first started getting, it sounds like it's online where this all started.
Yes. I think 15 might
Okay.
have started at 14, but 15 is really when it seemed to start affecting him.
Yeah.
I don't know when he first encountered the concept of
Hmm.
trans. It's online and it's also friends online. He's with these kids he knows at school, but I feel like when they're online chatting or even just voice chatting, it's more comfortable to talk about difficult topics than it is when you're face to face.
Oh, that's true.
Um,
Wow, yeah.
Late at night, and there are these kids talking or sharing pictures and talking about stuff. I think maybe they are more open. And his friends are so supportive. Like, I mean, if this were a real thing, I'd be like, oh my gosh, these kids are great. His
Mhm.
friend Danny, who is, I believe, hetero, he's dating a girl, is always like, do you need to talk? How are you feeling? Everything okay? Super supportive. But it's all about how his mood is being affected because of his quote dysphoria.
Mhm.
But yet, if you say, let's go to the Lego store, all dysphoria is gone. If we say, like, let's go do something you want to do,
Mhm.
it's when they get away from kind of the navel gazing of
Yeah,
thinking
it's like
about.
ruminating over gender. It's a strange,
Hmm.
strange thing. They just decide that all their troubles are all to do with their gender being wrong somehow. But what
And
they
they
really
have
maybe need to
troubles,
realize is
yeah.
they're just trying to figure out what gender is.
Yeah, or they're just feeling weird. And for some reason, right now, this is the answer society is giving them. Like, if you
Mhm.
Google, feeling weird in my body, you don't really get like puberty is a struggle. It's going to be hard. You get maybe you're in the wrong body.
Yeah, isn't that terrible? I think it was Stella O'Malley in Gender: A Wider Lens talked about in one of the early episodes a symptom pool. Have you heard of this? That
Yes.
in any generation, there are sort of like people used to have fainting spells all the time, and if you had stress in your life, you would suddenly develop a symptom where you just can't stop fainting all the time, and you have a fainting couch because that was that was the way people thought that was a condition. So people kind of started acting it out, and subconsciously, or whatever the right word is, it just started happening. And this seems to be that. The symptom pool right now is if you have any stress, trans is what your issue is. So
So
everybody's throwing
true.
themselves into it. And it's so easy to ruminate over sex and gender because it's everywhere in society and it's confusing and it is a battlefield right now. We're trying to open up gender roles. We're trying to break down the rules that say women have to do this and men have to do that. And that's great. But an unintended side effect of that is that right now, while we're still working this all out, kids are very confused. And instead of saying you can do whatever you want, they're saying I need to go to a doctor and fix myself.
Yes, and the doctor will say, "Okay, I'll fix you." That's the
Yeah.
real problem to me is that there's nowhere to go for help that's anything but affirmation.
Yeah, that must be so, so terrifying because everywhere, everybody is saying this is real. Everybody is saying all these kids, when their entire social peer groups have all decided that they're transsexual and need to have sex changes, that it's all true and that it's all real and it needs to be done as quickly as possible. So it must be so crazy making and isolating.
It is so much. If I didn't have this group, which it took me a long time to find, I said it took me about a year to
Wow.
find this group. Like, I guess I just started searching, onset at puberty, transgender, autism, and I found my way to Lisa Littman's first mention of ROGD, and
Hmm.
then Marchiano, and then I found Sasha Ayed's page, which was really my big eye opener. And then you go through a lot of checks to get into some of these groups because they
Mm,
don't want infiltrators.
that's right. God, isn't that
Um,
so scary? It's like
it's
being
unbelievable.
in an underground in East Germany or something like that.
It's surreal. But the biggest surreal part to me is how the medical community has just grasped onto this. And my son, who's so smart, he took AP Psych. They learned about some of these things like the lobotomy
Mm-hmm. Scandal, yeah.
period scandal, where the guy who invented the procedure won the Nobel Prize. It was the best thing. Like, probably someone who is perfecting some transgender surgery will win the Nobel Prize.
Right.
Maybe that will teach more people. But he perfected this surgery, and then it was so abused, and eugenics, all
Mm-hmm.
all of these sort of medical scandals, Tuskegee, and they're not seeing the connection here with the first do no harm.
Yeah, and it doesn't make any sense. If it was true that all of these young people that it like there's what is it, something like 2% of young people in the States now are identifying as transgender? What's 1 in 50?
And
If it was true that 1 in 50 kids throughout all time just needed to get sex changes before they were old enough to vote or they would die, then what's going on in like Papua New Guinea right now? Are 1 in 50 of the
yes,
children in Papua New Guinea dying because they don't have access to sex changes?
right.
What was going on right here in the United States and Canada 15 years ago before we were giving everyone sex changes? Were they dying? No,
Nope.
they were not dying. They were
Nope.
perfectly fine. What
And I
happened
think they're
was
not
they were
dying
coming
now.
out of the closet, figuring out that they were gay. They were trying on crazy clothes, identifying as goths and emos, rebelling against their parents, getting a tattoo, dyeing their hair, and for the most part, coming out okay, you know?
Yes, that's the big part, coming out okay. Whereas this is
Yeah.
going under the knife or taking drugs. And since we have a hereditary chronic kidney disease in our
Mm-hmm.
family, I really don't want my kid to take hormones, and he knows that.
Mm.
So we'll see what happens
Mm-hmm.
with that. That could be a factor that reins him in a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the medical capture of the medical community is the scariest part to
Do
me. It
you have a
really,
network within your parents group? Are you starting to share contacts? Obviously, you're familiar with Sasha Ayad. So you have a little bit of a network in terms of therapists, it sounds like.
I mean,
Maybe not.
online,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody that I could actually talk to in person
Mm-hmm.
locally. I have actually, toward the beginning of this, because my son has had therapy for anxiety. We had someone who was doing Zoom therapy, and as soon as I brought it up to her, she pulled out the genderbread person who's, your, I don't know, your sexuality, your gender, how it all supposedly fits together, and in this little gingerbread person. Maybe we can look up some more info on that. I'm trying to remember the details, but a trans person came up with this
Yeah,
concept, I believe, and it's an easy
nonsense.
way to teach young children how to understand their gender identity.
Which is to say, how to
Um,
disconnect their gender identity from their biological sex. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we got rid of her. And then I was interviewing another therapist who he speaks to, but I really made it clear that we're just working on anxiety. I told him some of these things, and he's an older guy, which I had been informed that older therapists are sort of better in this area because they've been at it a long time. They've seen a lot of kids go through things. They're a little more suspicious of cultural changes that happen really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so this guy said, "Well, if your son brings it up, I would have to like meet him where he is on that. But he is in a group of state of Pennsylvania psychologists online, and he said there is a lot of discussion about this, about whether this affirmative model is the right thing to do, and there is a lot of pushback on both sides. So he's seeing things are changing, and he knew about Tavistock
Mm.
in
Great.
England, which I was happy about. And I think sometimes these doctors are afraid to even say to a parent, no, I won't affirm right away,
Right.
because maybe the parent's going to turn them in.
Yeah.
So it's
Sometimes, like you
very
said,
East Germany.
These other two boys, the parents are all in, you know? Yeah.
They would
Yeah.
turn this guy in. Yeah, and these parents also are
Yeah.
pushing to let their kids use the girls' bathroom at school, which is not good.
No, it's not good for the girls, especially if some of these boys turn out to be they're doing this because they're sexually aroused by girls,
Yes, if it's an
you know?
AGP type thing,
Yeah, that's
um,
right.
it's a
Not that it's
big
really any better
old
for the
mess.
girls if they're gay, because I don't think homosexual, transsexual should be using women's bathrooms either.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've become much more of a modern, not quite rad, but maybe rad feminist over this because I never stopped and thought
Hmm.
about how hard women have worked to get all these rights that I enjoy. And then some men who say they are women and just walk all over them. And then I love
Yeah.
that little thing about, like, well, how come men aren't really wanting to be women in these countries where women are totally abused and subservient? And, like, it doesn't seem to happen
Yeah, there's not a lot of trans women in
there.
Afghanistan. I don't think there are
Right.
any trans women in Afghanistan. Yeah. Yeah, and
If
the
it's
bathroom
that,
thing. Speaking
yeah.
to so many women, I didn't realize how much of a safe haven it can be. That especially teenage girls, they get so much unwanted attention from men. And girls sharing stories with me that I didn't know about how they would see a man and he would seem to be following them in the mall, and they get
Oh,
very frightened
yeah.
and they go directly to the women's washroom because that's their escape. That's the force field safe zone, right? And if that's gone, that's terrible. That story
Gosh.
was what did it for me. I think I may have been, as I was slowly evolving on this, I think the bathroom, I was like, changing rooms, no. But bathrooms, maybe it's okay because it's just a bathroom, was my kind of idea.
Yeah.
And now I've just thrown that out. I've realized how important it is for women to have their spaces, period, full stop. And another way of looking at it, I thought about was like, imagine a parallel universe where trans doesn't exist yet. And for some reason, this society in a parallel universe is trying to decide that there are some males who should be treated as though they're females, and there are some males who should be allowed into female safe spaces. What would the criteria be for deciding which males should be allowed into female spaces? I would think they would be there. They've proven that they're not a threat to women. They've demonstrated that they have an affinity to women. And the criteria for no way Jose would be if you've ever harassed women or been hostile to women. So those are the criteria. But instead, with transgender, the criteria is, do these men want to go into women's spaces? This is a
Yeah.
man who wants really bad to go into women's spaces. And it's not about, are they safe for women? Are they going to make women uncomfortable? None of that is even in the question. The question is entirely, it's about what these men want and do they get what they want, at the end of the day. And that's not right. So tell me, what is the state of your son now? Do you think he's more into it, less into it, or about the same? What do you think?
I want to say maybe minutely less into it as he's maturing a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Again, I keep thinking maybe I should sit him down and just have it out, not in a harsh way, but just like,
Mm-hmm.
where are you with this? But a lot of the advice seems to be don't even bring it up,
Mm-hmm.
kind of let him figure it out. Um, it's that cult approach. I think it's Stephen Hassan has spoken to my group about, you don't want to push them away. You want to keep them with you. So you kind of tacitly agree to whatever they're thinking, but you just don't discuss it and move
Mm-hmm.
on with life and do other things. We're
Mm-hmm.
looking at colleges now, which is a little concerning because they're all, not all, but many are very woke, which I've learned
Yeah.
about. And we're not religious. He's not going to go to that type of a school.
He's not going to go to Liberty University? Come on.
No, God, I would
I'm
have to
kidding.
barf. So we were at GWU in DC looking there, George Washington
Oh,
University, and
wow. I hear that's
and
been a great university.
it's awesome, but it's not normal in the sense that it's in a city, so it's just big building, big building. You're walking all through DC. Um, I feel like for him it would be maybe a grad school type place, but I think he needs a little more community than it would be easy to find at such a big place. All the kids that were doing the tours and were in the admissions office were super gender nonconforming. Which normally I would say that's awesome, but I just got the feeling like, I don't know, I didn't really look to see if
No,
they
isn't
had.
that funny? I used to think gender nonconforming was the greatest thing. And now there's just this, I just get this moment of hesitation like, are you in the cult? You know?
Yes. And are you
It
going to
used to
tell
be,
me your
look how
pronouns?
fabulous you are. You're wearing some crazy outfit and
Yeah.
you've got makeup and fabulous hair. You go. And now it's like, uh-oh, are you gonna give me some pronoun? Yeah, crap. Yeah.
That's it. That is exactly it. We were just at an escape room. I didn't even notice it, but my daughter said afterward, "Did you notice that our guide had I go by they them pronouns?" I was like, I did not. So we are looking at this one college in Annapolis called St. John's College. That's very traditional in terms of its, like, they learn, it's right up my son's alley. They learn Greek and French, I think. Everything is done in small groups. It's very debate style. It was on a list I found of the most non-woke universities, and it's not
Yeah.
religiously affiliated.
Right.
Um, and I think it's very, like, they're all about critical thinking and breaking things
Mm.
down. So to
Wow.
me, that sounds quite reality based.
Mm-hmm.
And another mama in this group looked things up for me, and she said, "Oh, they don't seem to just give away hormones at the school clinic at that school, whereas every other one, you could pretty much walk in and say, I want cross-sex hormones, and they'll give them to you."
Yeah, it's so scary that universities, these kids are just leaving the home and they're suddenly being put in this situation where the universities are giving them, I think even surgeries, is that right? They're giving them.
I wouldn't be surprised. And these moms I know, kind of going back to that, are so happy that their insurance covers everything, even the surgeries that they're going to have in the future. Like, yay.
It was everything is upside down. All these things that should be great are now a threat, Isn't it scary?
Yeah. And it's so scary to be on this side of things. Like, I always thought, I think people in the quote mainstream think I'm the loony right now, whereas I was always the one that I felt like was looking out at these other crazy people thinking off the wall things. And now I feel like I'm not in the mainstream on this issue.
Yeah, it's crazy. Everything is it's everything's backwards. Everything, it feels like East Germany so much. It must be so difficult being a parent. I'm really surprised to hear that Stephen Hassan spoke to you. I've been harping on about this for 2 years now, that this is a cult. And I remember even as recently as last year, it felt still a little taboo to explicitly say this looks like a cult. But now it's just absolutely everyone within this movement, everybody who's sort of peaked trans and realized that there are problems with this. We all see the direct, unambiguous parallels with a dangerous cult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he spoke to our group. One thing that I couldn't find any evidence of on my son's computer, doesn't mean it's not there, is this hypno sissy porn.
Yeah.
And I guess it's sounds and things you look at, but Hassan was quite interested in that and looked at some of it and felt like it was very sort of high level creation. So whoever is making some of this stuff really knows what they're doing as far as hypnotizing and mesmerizing these kids. Like, it's not just some 12-year-old saying you are trans.
No, yeah, exactly. These are intelligent grown adults who are working to indoctrinate these kids
Absolutely.
into this. And do you think some of the people who were reaching your child on the internet were like that? Were adults who were targeting children?
Well, I don't feel directly in my kid's case, but just these influencers and these Reddit conversations. So he might not have had a direct conversation with someone, but if you put out there that I think I might be trans,
Hmm.
no one is suggesting that there may be other reasons for why you're feeling this way. When did you start feeling this way? All those kind of like who, what, when, where, why questions. It's just,
Well, Reddit
I
is an interesting
validate
one.
you.
Yeah, and you have to on Reddit. I'm not sure if you're aware of how much Reddit specifically is controlled by a dangerous group.
I don't know a lot about it, but I heard something, and that they've shut down any contrary.
Yeah, and they control all of the transgender message boards on Reddit. Yes,
That
and one
kids
of
have access to.
and they will shut down anything that is critical of the narrative, because Reddit is one of the biggest social media, message boards on all the internet, especially around young people. Yeah.
Especially around young people, it's super popular, and
Hmm.
that is so scary. And I don't even know how we begin other than it coming kind of from the top down with the Olympics thing might pique people, like to get people to look a little deeper into this, that they would trickle down to then seeing what's happening with
Yeah. I
young
think the
kids.
Olympics is a big one. I've been saying that for years too, that the Olympics is going to peak trans people. And Laurel Hubbard is such a perfect example of, an egregious act of cheating.
Yes, and these poor women who have worked their whole lives.
Yeah, and Laurel Hubbard is the son, Gavin Hubbard is this person's real name, of the former mayor of Auckland, New Zealand, which is the biggest city in the entire Pacific Islands. And his father's like or the head of some multi-billion-dollar
I
food
heard
empire.
came
So
from
this is literally probably the richest, most privileged person in that entire part of the world. Not some vulnerable trans woman, but a
nope.
very entitled, privileged jock, essentially, who has decided to do this because of his sense of entitlement, not because of some tragic transgender condition,
So much
And then
narcissism.
yeah, it's really awful because these women are working so hard, and some of them come from, like Samoa, these small countries that have, they're economically deprived. And this is such a thing that is so much pride for these women. And then for this rich, entitled man to just come along and take it away, it just seems awful.
And how is this not presented that way in the news?
Yeah, why
It's
are we still
totally,
framing it like some tragic, precious trans woman
and
who's,
how brave and wonderful that she is. Yeah.
yeah, it's just really astonishing. So that one's an interesting one because I think people are starting to wake up and see that this was never what we meant when we were saying, let's be sympathetic to people with genuine dysphoria who are trying to genuinely live their lives in some semblance of the opposite sex, whatever that means. There's a lot of room for compassion there, and it's a
Totally.
small and rare condition. But that's not what's going on,
Not at all. And I
Yeah.
just wonder, 10 years from now, are we going to look back? Like I think someone should write an article that's sort of like written from the future standpoint of, remember this time in history when we went through this crazy, just like we read now about eugenics,
I've always wanted to do that, like write an article that
I
has a
say that
dateline.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're on the same page. It's amazing.
I
So
know.
how many parents are in your group, would you say?
Oh gosh.
If you're allowed to say. I know
I
it's
think
very
now, so my smaller group, I'll call it, which is just boys, we've sort of merged into this Genspect, which is for parents dealing with this, boys, girls, everybody.
yeah.
But the moms of boys group, I want to say we're over 100 now, and it's not, like I said, it took me a year to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I was crying when I found it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a place where I can talk about this. Other people are going through what I'm going through. One mom is really great about doing polls to trying to figure out what are the commonalities between these kids. Uh, Upwards of 70%, I don't have it in front of me, are autistic and
Wow.
gifted. There's this group called Davidson Young Scholars. It's for kids who scored like crazy high IQ, and you can only get in it if you have, it's like more than Mensa, but for
Wow.
young kids. My kid, just by virtue of his autism diagnosis, they did the IQ test, and it was like, oh, this kid's a genius. So I happened to mention it once the gifted thing came up, and there are two other moms in this small group with kids who are in Davidson Young Scholars. So
Mm.
we decided to contact them and speak to them, and they were hopeless. They were Kool-Aid all the way, which is disappointing.
Yeah, that's astonishing.
Which is so, like, contradictory. How can you be so freaking smart and not see
Yeah.
this?
What do you
But
think
it's
it is? The smartness? Is it something to do with social awkwardness or social isolation from peers, or maybe they're too smart for their own good, so they're overthinking things, or
I
what do you think?
think they could be overthinking things. I think, I mean, there's a lot of autism overlap in general with high IQ. It's kind of interesting with the sort of Asperger's part of the spectrum. So there is sort of a disconnect, I think, between their intelligence and their common sense in a lot of ways. It's the kind of nutty professor or
Mm.
absent-minded professor kind of a syndrome. And so
Mhm.
when they're fed something, which in this new internet age, they're being fed things that kind of make them feel like they belong to something. I think that's what it is with my son. Like, oh, this is a
Mm.
group I belong to. I don't really have a lot of friends that are into, you know, Norwegian mythology or whatever, weird interest he has at the moment. But this is like a group of people who are kind of mainstream that I could be a part of.
That's interesting. And it's interesting you said that he's not expressed much interest in anything beyond hormones right now.
Not to me. I mean, part of me thinks he thinks in his head he's biding his time until he goes off and is on his own, and then he'll do all these things. But
Yeah.
he's such an introvert. He is socially awkward. I don't think he has the mental strength to advocate for himself to get transgender treatment.
But is he cross-dressing very explicitly right now, or?
Not at all. Not at all.
So he's not cross-dressing? Is his hair grown long, or?
Hair has grown very long, longer than mine. So that has been a thing. And at first it was kind of like, oh, it's COVID. We're not going to we don't have to do haircuts. Has always hated haircuts. Kind of an autistic thing.
Autistic thing, yeah.
So we would go as far as we could, and then it'd be like, okay, well, spelling bee's coming up. Why don't you get a haircut for that? Like, I'd always have some reason. And now he's old enough to kind of make that choice for himself. And of course, he has gorgeous hair, and everybody compliments him on it, which doesn't help. But yeah, nothing. I mean, his shirts are all Star Wars type of shirts or video game shirts, shorts. He's very, very thin. And I can tell, even though he doesn't really admit it, like he's kind of controlling his eating, not to any anorexic standpoint, but I think there's something going on with, and I've heard this from other parents, that, they think thin means womanly. So there is some of that.
Wow, that sounds like it's a bit of a parallel with the ROGD girl cohort. Yeah, that's troubling.
And the anorexia thing, not that we're seeing quite that, but that was somewhat of a social contagion at one time. I mean, there are people who genuinely have it. It's treated as a mental illness, and they always give that example of, would you give an anorexic, would you tell her it's okay to starve yourself, don't eat? But yet when someone says, I'm a boy and I think I'm a girl, we say, okay, take these hormones and get your hoo-ha cut off. And
and the other thing with anorexia is they keep you apart. If there's somebody who's checked into a psych ward with anorexia, if there are two anorexics in a psych ward, they have to be kept on different floors and never brought into contact, because once they're in contact with each other, they're going to collude together in opposition to their psychiatric treatment. Right?
Exactly the same. Wow.
Isn't that the same? The transgender, these kids get together, they decide that they're trans against the world, and you need to get them separated from these peers who are egging each other on.
Transgender support groups,
which are turning into just that.
Support groups where they all sit around.
You never put anorexics in a group together, because the first thing they're going to do, even if they're supposedly there to help each other, they're going to egg each other on. You never bring anorexics together is the rule. Right?
So we need to apply this thinking to transgender. I don't know why we're not.
Yeah. Well, I've heard a lot,
money to be made. That's the other side of it too, is the money to be made on lifelong patients taking hormones and.
Well, and doctors see everything in terms of treating medically, right?
The hammer and the nail.
The hammer and the nail, exactly. So, yeah, I just find that really, the doctors, I guess, they're just so used to, like, you just treat something medically, and they're so biased towards that kind of treatment, and psychiatric treatment is clearly what is needed. But I'm really pissed off because the psychiatric profession is so cowardly around this. They just think it's once transgender comes up, they ignore all the other symptoms, all the other issues, all the other conditions, all the situation of a person's life. They just suddenly become a one-dimensional trans person, and they need a one-dimensional trans treatment from a one-dimensional trans expert. And that's just a complete dereliction of duty. And I think that's cowardice. I think they know this is a hot potato issue, and they just want to pass it on to someone else.
I totally agree. Yes. And then I wonder 10 years down the road, when hopefully we've come out of this, how they're going to explain themselves. Like, how did the guy who did all the lobotomies live with himself after realizing, like, hey, I damaged people.
Yeah. Oh, the reckoning is going to be astonishing. The parallels with East Germany are incredible. I'm watching a show right now, and it's all about East Germany. It's a fictional drama. And it's just the last episode I watched, the wall just came down in the last 2 minutes of
What's
it.
it called?
Oh, it's called Deutschland. There's 3
Deutschland.
series, Deutschland
I'll have to
83,
look for
Deutschland
that.
86, Deutschland 89. It's really interesting because the East Germans, they think they're on the side of virtue. You know, their communist ideals are progressive and liberal on paper.
They're
And
captured.
they're captured and they do terrible, terrible things, but they're so much better than those evil capitalists who are so corrupt, you know? So they're just so convinced of their righteousness that they do terrible things. But the minute that wall comes down, they just have this moment of, oh my God, I'm the bad guy and I'm about to face my reckoning, you know?
Yeah.
The second it happens, right up to the minute they're trying to prevent it from going down, they still think they're on the side of virtue. But the second they realize it's over, this look on their faces of like, holy shit. So I can't wait to see the rest of that show. But the parallels with this movement are astonishing. What is going to happen in the future? It's not a matter of if your group of parents and parents like you are going to come out having been proved right. It's a matter of when, of course.
I think so. I don't see how it.
Oh, I know so. There's no question. There's a certainty that is almost 100. Nothing's 100% when we're rational, scientific-minded people, but we're close enough to it in this case that, you know, there's no question.
For me is also many people who believe in science and are on the liberal side of things. They are in the cult. They drink the Kool-Aid for transgender, but yet they're so questioning and science-minded on other things. So I don't know how to. I am trying to pique friends of mine. Like my neighbor has pretty much been piqued after seeing 3 kids at her kid's school.
Yeah, a small school you said too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like, are this happening to girls too, or is it just boys so far in your school?
I don't know. I don't know of any girls. There are girls that I see who could just be gender non-conforming. Again, it used to be like awesome to see girls just, you know, with their butch haircuts and flannel shirts and stuff. So I don't know now if I'm seeing that, if that's like, oh yeah, it's a gay girl, or is that a girl who's trying to be a boy? So I don't know any personal stories of girls, but I do wonder when I see the girls walking out of school.
Now that's astonishing that there's been so much attention on the rapid onset girls with that extraordinary book, Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier, of course. And now it's about time we turn our attention to what's going on with these boys too, because their inner lives, the inner lives of young adolescent boys are in some ways just as complicated. And they have difficulties too in a different way than girls. And, you know, they're having a hard time in this internet age, just like the girls are. They're having a hard time reckoning with their sexualities. They're having a hard time with society's pressure on social norms. You know, there's still so much pressure for boys to puff up and be masculine. And a lot of boys don't like it, you know?
And I thought you would have thought by now it would be okay to be the kind of boy, whatever kind of boy you are and whatever kind of girl you are. Like that seems like the positive direction for civilization, not...
And it is. And I think the irony is that this is a side effect of heading in that direction. We're in that in-between phase where we're just starting to shed these gender constricting roles. But we're in this interim phase where they're still around and there's still pressure to conform to them, but we're being told we could get out of them. And the way somehow it works out in this sort of in-between phase is that everybody decides, instead of getting rid of the boxes, to just switch boxes, you know?
Yeah. Isn't it strange? Maybe just it's the growing pains of civilization, but yet my kid is being messed up by it. So it's happening to me right now. But it is interesting to look at it from a societal, and trying to think of what it'll be like to look back historically on these sort of changes that we're going through. But it's hard when you're in the thick of it.
What's it like peak transing? Like, I wonder, because you have a child who identifies as trans, does that give you more sort of leverage to peak trans people?
I think so, because especially people who know me, know my kid, know the kind of parent that I've been. I have one friend especially who said, I'm so surprised that you're like approaching it this way. I would have thought you would be, you know, all in on the trans train. And I said, you know what? I would have thought that about me too from the outside if anybody knew me. But the more I have learned and researched, I'm a science girl, and this doesn't make sense to me logically and scientifically. And I don't think people can change their gender or their sex. And then from the women's rights standpoint, I think we're going the wrong way. So it really has shifted my thinking. But I think that helps people because I haven't always been seen as like a crazy outlier. And all my friends are liberal, but
Yeah,
yet
so I guess the narrative that you're some kind of, some kind of parallel to a homophobe or some unaccepting
right.
parent, it's just not going to fly with anyone who knows you, kind of thing.
Not exactly. So I think it does kind of give me some clout as far as saying, this is what I'm seeing and it's based on all these things that I've learned and I can send you some information, read this book.
Mm-hmm. I feel I get a little bit of that being a gay person and one who was very feminine as a boy. That gives me a little bit of leverage to talk
Yeah.
to some of my friends. But I still have to be careful because despite that, you could be friends with someone for decades. They could know full well that you couldn't be more progressive if you tried, and you couldn't be more of an ally to women's rights and gay rights. I literally have done work with our Pride committee, and I worked at a gay bar for years, and I've just been the gayest advocate in the universe. And I worked at a trans bar. I've been surrounded by trans people. And and still I start saying I'm skeptical. I have problems with this movement, and people's minds just snap shut. And it's like, how do you think I was invaded by a body snatcher? Like,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I definitely, these other two moms that I know who have the kids on hormones, I just tell them I'm doing the watchful waiting. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's best. And just kind of let it see what happens. And they're respectful of that. But yet, they can't say enough wonderful things about the gender clinic and how nice they are. They are the nicest people.
Yeah, Scientologists are really nice too
Yeah,
when they're trying to get
right,
you to come into their clinic,
right.
Yeah, it's amazing. What do you think? What are some of your advice for parents who are in this situation, who haven't yet found your secret underground network?
Oh, keep looking for information. I mean, no matter how you feel, no matter how accepting you are, I think it's good to hear all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel nobody is harshly condemning the trans community in my group at all.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to help kids figure out who they are and get through this teen young adult phase of life without making any big permanent changes that are going to make them lifelong patients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to me, educate yourself, read some of these books. Don't close your mind by thinking, oh, it's homophobic, it's transphobic. To look at anything that's not full affirmation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
and
guess that's all it
keep an
takes.
eye
Yeah.
on your keep an eye on your kids' technology.
Yeah. That
Take
I
it
can
to
imagine that must be so hard to do. I obviously I'm not a parent. I don't really know what it's like to be a parent, but I can imagine I would want to not pry into my kids' privacy,
mhm.
and I would want to not limit my kids' access to the internet because I would want to be the cool parent who's giving my kid freedom, kind of thing.
And
But
assume that they're going to be smart enough to make the right decisions. But even the
yeah.
smartest, level-headed, seemingly level-headed kid, I think, gets sucked in when they're going through these hormonal and emotional changes. If it hits them just the right time, that the
Hmm.
reason for this is because you're in the wrong body, they just latch onto it.
Yeah, and the biases online are all skewed towards encouraging kids to identify as transgender. I said somewhere that it's like the kids are walking down the Las Vegas Strip and they're surrounded by giant neon lights beckoning them to come into these trans casinos, kind of thing. It's just like
Yeah.
the internet is just screaming at kids to join the trans train everywhere they go, and they're literally these organizations like Reddit are literally controlled by people who are very, very dangerous people. It just sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's 100% true. These people who will silence any dissent, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a scary, scary time to be a parent and to be a kid.
Yeah. It
But
is.
I mean, overall, I feel more positive than I have in a long time because I feel like we're getting some traction. We're getting some people to peak.
Hmm.
Um, you're doing shows now, Angus. It's growing. I think we're in the upward phase of this movement.
Yeah, and
And
what's interesting with the East German parallel is that there was rumbling that started growing very quickly that people were unhappy in East Germany. And then it fell apart just like that. It reached a critical mass and then it crumbled instantly in the snap of a finger. And I have a feeling something like that is going to happen here. The rumblings are getting louder and louder, and the discontent and the dissent is growing, and the attempts to silence it and quell it are starting to not work. Right now, we still have to be underground. There's still a lot of fear, but it's getting bigger and bigger. And eventually our voices are going to start making our way into the mainstream media, which is what Genspect is all about, getting these voices into the mainstream media and giving the media no excuse to not reach out to the other side and to hear our viewpoint. But once that starts happening, it's not going to be a slow opening up of debate. It's going to be a collapse.
Because
and then
once
the
people
aftermath
know,
will be
you
astonishing.
can't unsee it. Like once you sort of have that switch of point of view, you can't go back.
You can't go back, and you realize how shocking it was what you were doing, you know? Like, it's like you have to be in a very controlled frame of mind to think it's okay to sterilize teenage children, you know? And once you fall out of that very, very myopic, controlled state, you have to be looking at it one very, very precise way, you know? And if you look at it from any other point of view, it's crazy, right? Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've been talking for a little over an hour now, so this seems like a good place to stop. Do you have anything else you want to say to parents or to teens or to anyone else who's watching?
Mostly to parents. I feel like especially to moms, because I feel like there are dads in our group who are awesome, but a lot of times moms are just the ones who kids talk to a little bit more, so we hear the problems.
Yeah.
But if your kid is questioning or talking about gender in any way, have an open discussion about it. I think it's good to let them know that they shouldn't take everything at face value. I mean, if my kid had come to me early, my autistic kid is not necessarily the type to do that, but and said, "Mom, I'm really struggling with whether I'm a boy or a girl," I think I would immediately try to show them the biology of it all, the science of, appeal to what they know.
So thanks again so much, Eleanor, for taking the time out to speak with us. I'm really excited for what's going on with Genspect. I'm so excited that there are groups like yours coming together. I'm really excited that the media is going to be starting to take note of what's going on. Your courage and your principles, sticking to the truth, is much admired. It's so difficult, obviously, to be a parent in this situation with everyone against you, when all you're trying to do is what's best for your own children. So much admiration to you.
Thank you for giving us a voice. I mean, we've had no voice at all. We've really been totally underground. So I feel like we're starting to come up. We're still kind of in the mud, but we're coming up.
Yeah.
And our voices are going to be heard. And I think people are going to empathize with us. We're not transphobes. We're not terrible people that are trying to hurt kids. We're trying to help kids grow into adults who can then make their own decisions. But to me, it's this guiding them through this period of their life. That's a reason we're called adults and they're not yet. So.
That's great. That's the money shot. I think I'm going to do an introduction with just like you saying that, and then we'll go into the whole thing. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good.